Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It's more like, can you see me now?
Yes.
Shorter than everything down here. My name is Diane Lilly. I'm with the Friends Group, and we are thrilled to have you here today. Welcome, welcome. Louder. There's a microphone.
Use it.
Okay. My first speaking engagement. Again, I'm sorry. I'm Diane Lilly. I'm with the Friends Group. And my pleasure today is to welcome you to our fourth and final Taylor Talk of 2025. They're having fun over here. I love it. Okay. We have these quarterly presentations that highlight the history and the culture of the Mesilla Valley. Basically, that's the premise. But they're all different. They're all very different. And so we have different speakers. And luckily, we have the most fabulous staff at this historic site. They are amazing, and they're incredibly well trained and highly educated and dedicated to this project. So again, I'm Diane Lilly, and I'd like to see hands up and keep them up if you're of the Taylor family. Taylor family? We've got representatives. Yes, keep them up. And then who are the staff of the Taylor-Mesilla Historic Site? Okay, many of those. And now the Taylor-Mesilla Friends and the board members. Hands up. Okay, that's quite a good sign. Everybody hands down. Now hands up if this is your first experience with this. Wow, quite a few. Thank and welcome. Later on we'll ask you how you found out. A special thanks, especially always, to the Taylor family and their parents who decided to donate this home and the contents to the state. And this wouldn't be happening without the help of the legislature. You can write anything into the state as a gift, but if there's no money to back it up, it goes nowhere. And you can imagine the house that was built in the 1850s might need a little work. So when the house was donated, the state took it over. They have worked hard to remodel it and bring it up to speed and code. Another monumental job. But before the legislature will give you any money, they were very generous last year, but that doesn't happen without the lobbying efforts of all the people who kept calling their legislators and telling them how important this is to the state of New Mexico. Southern New Mexico is rather, forgotten. Yes, forgotten. But I think that this historic site is going to change that. It already is. It takes a village and a lot of money. So we appreciate your support for our Friends Group. All of our money goes back into the historic sites to support what they're doing with projects and events and things like that. So if you're interested in joining our little group, there's a table back here. How handy is that? So we also have back there our gift shop, a little sampling of the books we sell in the gift shop. The gift shop right now is in a corner, a little nicho of the visitor center, and thank you for your space. You can have it back soon. The building is the old Ruelas store to the north is being renovated to be a real gift shop. And everybody's very excited about getting all the inventory out of the garage and into the shop. So that will be fun. Should be opening on the 8th of November, which is when the grand opening of the house will happen. So, on with the show. Our show today is a really interesting little known piece of history. Even if you grew up in New Mexico and grew up right here, you may not have heard these things, which is why Daniel Webb, who is a ranger now for the historic site and has been since last August. What was I going to say? So, which is why his title is, I have to read it, From the Territory of Montezuma to the Garden Spot of the Southwest, Visions of the Mesilla Valley Before Statehood. I've pretty much spent most of my life here. I've never heard of the Territory of Montezuma or the Garden Spot. So I thought, what's the easiest way? Go to the source. So I invited him for coffee one morning and had just the best conversation. You didn't get to say much, sorry, too much. But it was really interesting and fun. So I think we should take a ranger to coffee and find out. So he really opened my eyes and taught me so much in about 30 minutes. He was a professor. He went to school at the University of Chicago, and he studied under a Dr. Ramon Gutierrez, who was at the University of Chicago, which is far away. And his thing was archival research and borderlands and the native population, because Dr. Ramon Gutierrez was from Alen, New Mexico. How cosmic. Did you know that, Daniel, when you went there, or did you just find him?
I knew he was from New Mexico.
You knew he was from New Mexico. So, you know, New Mexico gets into your soul. So he found a like-minded spirit there, and he learned so much of what he does today from that professor. Then you went on to work at the University of Indiana, is that right? Indiana University, one of them. But then, instead of following the academic track, he was born and raised here in Las Cruces, went to local schools. His parents are here. So nice to have you back today. Well-raised, northern New Mexico, and a Californian who has learned better. not to denigrate California, but Las Cruces we have better traffic. So yes, and so the family was raised here. So when Daniel left, he could have gone anywhere on that academic trajectory. However, he really was interested in the borderlands, and in Chicago, you're really close to a different order. So this has a lot of meaning for him. So he chose to come back here and be a ranger. I don't know what the pay scale comparison is, but you know, living is cheap here. So we are welcoming Daniel Webb, but before we do that, there will be a question and answer session after the talk so that we can, you know, chop. And I'm going to ask for you to simply silence your phones. You don't need to turn them off, because you might have a brilliant question come to mind in the middle of this fascinating discussion, and you won't want to forget it, so you can type yourself a note, but let's keep it private, because also they're filming this. Everybody on their best behavior? Hair, makeup, okay, great. And let me introduce, let's welcome Daniel.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Diane, so much for that generous introduction. And I would just like to echo her acknowledgement of all the different people and constituencies that have made it possible to have the Taylor-Mesilla Historic Site open here in Mesilla in 2025. I would first and foremost like to thank the Taylor family for having the foresight to make this a possibility, to have a museum and a historic site in the Mesilla Plaza. I would also like to thank all the staff at New Mexico Historic Sites that represents the different sites across the state of New Mexico. I would like to particularly thank Alexander McKinney, who keeps this place running like a well-oiled machine. And I'd also like to thank the friends who really have made it a great pleasure to come to work in the Mesilla Plaza and to interact with the public in that really vibrant space just down the street from here. And then lastly, I would like to thank the staff at the New Mexico State University Library Archives and Special Collections. In particular, Dennis Daly and Elizabeth Villa have been really instrumental in making it possible to access a lot of the sources, including maps and photographs and archival documents that are the basis for a lot of the historical research and public programming that we do at the site. So thanks all around. So the title of my talk, as Diane mentioned, is From the Territory of Montezuma to the Garden Spot of the Southwest. And I'll be talking about some of the more esoteric terminology that was used for defining the borderlands in the 19th century. But before I go into the presentation, I would like to mention some upcoming dates that I'm sure you will all want to write down on your calendars. The first being Saturday, November 8th. That will be the grand opening fiesta of Taylor-Mesilla Historic Site. The ribbon cutting event will take place at 10 a.m. And there will be remarks given by different notable people from the community and from the state. And we'll have a series of performances beginning about 10:30 a.m. That will go until 3:30 in the afternoon. So this is not what the historic site looks like anymore, but this is really sort of a photograph of the beginning of the historic site in the 19th century. This is the Reynolds store. The Reynolds store, like much of the historic site, has gone under significant renovations since it was first built in the early 20th century. And we're going to open it up at the beginning of November with a new addition known as the History Vault. This is a two-piece installation that will have a recording station so that people from the public can come in to share stories or memories about growing up in Mesilla or visiting the community over the years. And it will also have a listening station so people can come in and listen not only to those stories that have been recorded, but also to stories that we have in the archives. So this is going to be an exciting opportunity for people to really engage with the history of this area. The Barella Store gift shop will also be opening at this time, and we're very excited to have that as a new space within the historic site that I'm sure will be very exciting for visitors who come into the plaza and take tours of the home. So the home has about 17 publicly accessible spaces that will be open to the public. And I really do encourage those of you who can make it to come on that Saturday, November 8th, because it will be free. And you will be able to walk through all of these spaces and explore them and appreciate the marvelous collection of artwork that is in the home. On that Sunday, there will also be free admission, but we will only have the self-guided spaces open on that Sunday. So there will be a much greater opportunity to really appreciate the full extent of the art and the architecture if you come on that Saturday. So today's Taylor Talk was inspired by a memorial that was submitted to the United States Congress on January 9th, 1865 by Secretary of the Territory of New Mexico named William F.M. Arny. He was petitioning Congress on behalf of the citizens of Doña Ana County to establish a new government to serve the people of southern New Mexico, and he called this territory the Territory of Montezuma. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this memorial and its implications in today's discussion about how the borderlands has really changed over time, especially during the mid-19th century and the era of the Civil War. And another source of inspiration that came into my hands while I was doing research for this talk was a pamphlet that was published by an organization that was known as the New Mexico Bureau of Immigration. The New Mexico Bureau of Immigration was involved in promoting people moving to the Territory of New Mexico before it became a state in 1912. And one of the publications that came out of Las Cruces in 1908 had the very elaborate title of Doña Ana County, New Mexico, containing the fertile Mesilla Valley, garden spot of the Great Southwest, where modern irrigation is now being brought to its highest development. And this pamphlet is a rather small pamphlet that was produced in maybe a print run of about 10,000 copies, and it was really designed to encourage people to move into this area. One of the things that caught my attention when looking at this source was this notion that irrigation would become central to southern New Mexico. And I do think that is a really important, if lesser known, part of the story of how the Mesilla Valley came to be what it is today. So these historical sources showcase the central importance of the Mesilla Valley in New Mexico's long and winding journey from a territory in 1850 to becoming the 47th state of the Union in 1912. The first section of my talk will look at the early settlement of the Mesilla Valley. So in the years when the Mesilla Valley was first settled, the population was composed almost entirely of Mexican citizens who left their homes in Texas and New Mexico because they objected to the U.S. military occupation that began in 1846. A man named Rafael Ruelas emerged as a leader in the predominantly Mexican community during these years. Born in 1820 in New Mexico, Ruelas worked as a miner in northern Chihuahua in the early 1840s. By 1844, he found employment as a fletero de metales, or a freighter, at the Barranco, Colorado near Janos. In 1847, 1 year after Colonel Alexander Donovan invaded the Mesilla Valley during the Mexican-American War, Ruelas moved to El Paso del Norte with his wife and his children. But in 1849, just 2 years after he had moved there, a band of Mescalero Apaches had invaded El Paso del Norte and killed about 15 farmers in that community. That is when Ruelas decided to move his family to Doña Ana, which was about 50 miles north of El Paso. In Doña Ana, Ruelas met a priest named Father Ramon Ortiz. Father Ortiz was born in Santa Fe in 1814 and had served as a parish priest in El Paso at the Church of Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe for nearly a decade before the Mexican-American War interrupted his priestly activities. In 1849, Father Ortiz was serving as the General Commissioner of Immigration, overseeing the repatriation of Mexican citizens who were displaced by the war. And Ortiz encouraged Ruelas to take about 60 loyal Mexican families from Doña Ana across the river to establish the colony of La Mesilla. I came across Ruelas when I was looking at a census from 1851. This was the first census recorded in the Mesilla Valley when this area was still under the control of the Mexican government. Ruelas recorded the name, age, estate, employment, and number of men, women, and children in each of the households. The 1851 census of Mesilla really demonstrated the success of Father Ortiz's repatriation policy. It showed that 1,210 residents had voted with their feet. Rather than subject themselves to the government of the United States, they chose to cross the muddy waters of the Rio Grande and retain their identity as citizens of Mexico. So to the best of their ability, the residents of Mesilla adhered to the colonization laws issued by the government of the state of Chihuahua. They were required, for example, to hold elections, and Rafael Ruelas was elected as the first prefect sometime around 1852. That is a position that he retained even after the United States annexed Mesilla as part of the Gadsden Purchase in 1854. So this is a map of the Gadsden Purchase. This was an international treaty between Mexico and the United States that transferred about 30,000 square acres of land from Mexico to the U.S. It included the Mesilla Valley, the boot heel of southwestern New Mexico, and all of present-day southern Arizona. The treaty at that time significantly increased the size of the U.S. territory of New Mexico and added a tremendous swath of land to what was considered at that time to be Doñana County. So while the majority of Nuevo Mexicanos in the territory supported statehood from the outset, there were a powerful minority of residents who opposed it. Many military officials, local prefects, lawyers, land speculators, and merchants relied upon federal contracts to pad their pockets. They reasoned that they would lose access to the benefits of Washington's largesse if the territory became a state. And certainly the indigenous peoples who claimed the region as their ancestral homelands and had fought against Spain and Mexico for control of its natural resources opposed both federal and state control of this territory. So the first political convention that was held in this newly acquired Gadsden Purchase occurred in 1856 in Tucson. A man named Sylvester Mowry organized a convention to draft a petition asking Congress to create a separate territory of Arizona to distinguish it from the territory of New Mexico. Mowry's primary interest was the region's mineral wealth, particularly the silver and copper mines at Pinos Altos and Santa Rita. In his memoir of the proposed territory of Arizona, Mowry presented a mouth-watering estimate of the total value of silver in the Mexican provinces at over $2 billion. Mowry reasoned, quote, "For the organization of the territory is the guarantee of a supply of silver, which will create a great revolution in the commercial world, as has the gold in California." And he claimed Arizona will be known as the Silver State from the resources of the Gadsden Purchase. So following the Tucson Convention in 1856, Rafael Ruelas presided over a similar political gathering in 1859 in Mesilla to support establishing the territory of Arizona. Delegates from Las Cruces, Doñana, Mesilla, Santa Barbara, Santa Tomas, and Bracito attended what was described as the largest and most respectable political assemblage ever convened in the Rio Grande Valley. So Mowry's memoir included a map of the proposed territory of Arizona. And this map starts around the West Texas area where El Paso is located and really covers the entire expanse of what was the Gadsden Purchase. Messilla's first weekly newspaper, the Mesilla Miner, dedicated the front page of its first edition to the Constitution for the Provisional Government of Arizona. Adopted on April 5th, 1860, it presented the legal framework for an executive office, a legislature, and a judiciary that was modeled on the Constitution of the United States. One of the more unusual features of this Constitution was its rules governing elections. The Mesilla Miner was succeeded 1 year later by the Mesilla Times. And this was a newspaper that was published down in the Mesilla Plaza at the location where you'll find the El Patio bar and dance floor today. The edition published on March 16, 1861 presented a forceful resolution by Mesilla resident Samuel Jones calling for joining the Confederate States of America. The same edition of the Mesilla Times featured a schedule for the Great Overland Mail Route, and Mesilla was advertised as the midway point between San Francisco, California, and St. Louis, Missouri. However, events in the summer of 1861 halted much of the traffic in either direction. So newspapers published in Mesilla this period demonstrated there was widespread support not only for establishing an independent government in southern New Mexico, but also for joining the broader movement of southern states to secede from the Union. While the political debates of this period were often couched in the language of states' rights, the core issue was the introduction of slavery in the western states and territories. Even before the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter in April 1861, the territory of New Mexico was divided between anti-slavery factions in Santa Fe and pro-slavery factions here in Mesilla. So this all boiled over in July of 1861 when John R. Baylor Confederate colonel, led a battalion of about 300 soldiers from Fort Bliss, Texas, into the Mesilla Valley. He successfully bypassed Union forces under the command of Major Isaac Lind, who were then stationed at Fort Fillmore. And while some residents regarded him with suspicion when he arrived in Mesilla, he was greeted with open arms by many supporters of the secessionist movement. So according to historian Mary Daniels Taylor, Baylor was a big man. He was about 6'3" and he weighed almost 250 pounds. He possessed the strength, the charisma, and the ambition that propelled him into the front lines of the Civil War in the Western theater. And he also had a hot temper. Unfortunately, he had a confrontation with the editor of the Mesilla Times, Robert P. Kelly, that resulted in his death on the Mesilla Plaza over an article that was published during the beginning of the conflict. So while Baylor declared Mesilla as the capital of the Confederate Territory of Arizona on August 1st, 1861, the course of the Civil War ended his military occupation within a year. Union soldiers, with the assistance of the New Mexico militia, defeated Confederate troops at the Battle of Glorieta Pass in late March 1862. 10 companies of 2,350 men under the command of Brigadier General James Henry Carleton marched from San Diego to Mesilla in July, forcing the retreat of the Confederate forces. So this is about the time that William F. Arny enters the picture. Arny was born in Washington, D.C. in 1813, and he had a close association with the federal bureaucracy, having grown up in the capital. He had employment as a federal Indian agent in Kansas before moving to the Territory of New Mexico in about 1862. And that's when he took up the position as the secretary to the governor of the Territory of New Mexico. The governor at that time, Henry Connolly, had very poor health, and Secretary Arny ended up actually fulfilling many of his duties while he was in office. In the spring of 1863, Arny traveled from Santa Fe to Mesilla to attend a convention that was organized by prominent citizens residing in Doña County to organize a new territory that would be called the Territory of Montezuma. So Secretary Arny, like many of the explorers who came out into this area, had a great interest in Native American history and culture. And that is probably what led him to name the proposed territory after who was the 9th emperor of the Aztec Empire. This was an individual who was alive at the time that Hernan Cortez invaded Mexico in 1520, and Montezuma became a symbol of resistance to the Spanish conquest, and an individual who was much revered in Mexico for his leadership. However, travel writers, businessmen, and politicians like Arny often invoked his name for their own purposes, with little regard for his historical or cultural significance. So the proceedings of the Mesilla Convention in 1863 were published in a bilingual newspaper, the New Mexican, or El Nuevo Mexicano, and it described the interests of the people of Doña County who were opposed to being included in the territory of New Mexico. They neither wanted to be part of the territory, nor did they want to become part of the state of New Mexico, should statehood come to pass. The officials resolved that including Doña County in the state would be, quote, prejudicial to our interest and welfare. They argued our connection to New Mexico would be a forced alliance, contrary to geographical position and to the laws of climate and commerce, and they also imposed an attachment to the newly organized territory of Arizona. So at that time, the boundaries of Montezuma stretched from present-day West Texas, including the city of El Paso, across the entirety of southern New Mexico. And this was, if you will, sort of an imagined territory. This was simply a proposal, a petition put onto paper and brought to Washington, D.C. They resolved in their convention that such an organization would afford an economical and accessible government to the people embraced within its limits, restoring them to prosperity and happiness and leading to the development of its manifold resources, mineral, agricultural, pastoral, and ultimately redounding greatly to the dignity of the wealth of the nation. So here's another view of how became extremely elongated during the 1850s and the mid-1860s. And much of this political discussion was really trying to figure out how are we going to govern this newly acquired territory through the Gadsden Purchase. What type of government are we going to have, and what types of values or ideology are we going to support within the territory? So the proposed territory of Montezuma was really seen as an antidote to the evils of the territory of Arizona that emerged earlier in southern New Mexico. Arny had allied himself closely with the Republican Party, and he really wanted to create a space that would be free from slavery after the end of the Civil War. So unlike the preceding conventions at Tucson and Mesilla, they vowed to support the Constitution of the United States and its laws and promised to maintain intact the integrity of and unity of the federal government. So Arny traveled to Washington, D.C. to deliver the memorial that I discovered in the archives when I was doing research while a graduate student. And this is, excuse me, this was really the beginning of an effort to promote southern New Mexico as a very distinct region within the West. And Arny was one of the first people to step forward and say that southern New Mexico was not like northern New Mexico. Its people, its culture, its resources were quite distinct from other areas that have been brought under the fold of the American government. And so he submitted this 52-page long petition that was full of very fabulous descriptions of the mountains and the pastures, and he even admired the desert in this region and saw in it a great potential for social and economic advancement for its people. For example, he recounted that in the mid-19th century, there were great amounts of grass and pasture that were available for ranching and for other operations in this area. He wrote, "For the profitable raising of horses, cattle, and sheep, and on the most extensive scale, no portion of the world can rival this district. Its mild climate presents no rigors, its winters no snows, while the mountain slopes, valleys, and plains are unlimited in extensive pasturage. The grasses of the plains and the mountain slopes are not the least of nature's wonders. These grasses cure in the dry season on the stalk, making a natural hay." So Arny was apparently fascinated by the grasses in this area, which were sadly overgrazed during much of the 19th century, and he may have contributed to that process. But he was surely enamored by this landscape, and he saw himself taking a prominent role in the settlement of this area in the second half of the 19th century. It should be noted that he was not the only one with an idea to claim, carve out a different section of the territory of New Mexico. In fact, there were 7 different petitions that Washington received during this era, nominating Jefferson, Lincoln, Salado, Sierra, Arizona, Montezuma, and Acoma territories to be separated from its original boundaries. But Secretary Arny's memorial also contributed to ongoing discussions about New Mexico shedding its status as a territory and achieving statehood. So this is a political cartoon entitled "Waiting for Their Stars," and it depicts the territories of New Mexico, Arizona, and Oklahoma as a miner, a rancher, and a farmer. The mining industry was seen as something that was particularly enticing for the territory here in New Mexico. And while President Theodore Roosevelt admitted Oklahoma as a state in 1907, New Mexico and Arizona did not shed their territorial status until 5 years later. And this is when the New Mexico Bureau of Immigration came to play a very prominent role in promoting settlement in this region. It was President McKinley who stipulated that the territory of New Mexico would need more people and more water before it could become a state. And that really became the mantra for many of those in political office who wanted to bring this area under the fold of the American government. So the Bureau of Immigration was actually founded by an individual named William Rich, who was the first president of the New Mexico Historical Society. He was somewhat of an antiquarian as he collected massive amounts of archival material from the Spanish, the Mexican, and the territorial periods. But he also was a huge booster, and he saw an opportunity to promote the resources of New Mexico through his scholarly research and his publishing program. The Bureau's mission was to prepare and disseminate accurate information as to the soil, climate, minerals, resources, production, and business of New Mexico, with special reference to its opportunity for development in the inducements and advantages which presents to desirable immigration and for the investment of capital. So Rich at the New Mexico Bureau of Immigration also called upon this symbol of Montezuma. This is sort of a leather-bound book that was published in 1883 that featured a gold embossed illustration of Emperor Montezuma on the back of an eagle floating over the landscape of the territory of New Mexico down below. And this is one of the symbols that was invoked to try and promote a statehood at that time. So the New Mexico Bureau of Immigration published hundreds of pamphlets that promoted the territory's bid for statehood. Yet territorial officials struggled to persuade members of Congress, and opposition from the Senate Committee on the Territories proved to be the most significant obstacle. A young Republican senator from Indiana named Albert J. Beveridge, who was staunchly opposed to statehood for New Mexico and Arizona, blocked promising proposals in 1903 and 1909. Standing at 5 foot 8 inches and weighing 158 pounds, newspapers referred to Senator Beveridge ironically as the young giant from Indiana. Though short in stature, he had an oversized personality and a sharp tongue. When delivering arguments against the bill for statehood, he spoke dismissively of New Mexico's population as mere children. He argued American soldiers, American teachers, American administrators are all instruments of the nation in discharging the nation's high duty to an ancient and yet infant people, which circumstance has placed in our keeping. New Mexicans were rightly offended by Beveridge's characterization of them as an ancient and yet infant people. In contrast, President Theodore Roosevelt defended their honor and integrity. Roosevelt had fought side by side with the New Mexican cavalry, known as the Rough Riders, in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. Speaking at a reunion of Rough Riders in Las Vegas, New Mexico, Roosevelt pledged, quote, "If New Mexico wants to be a state, you can count me in, and I will go to Washington to speak for you or do anything you wish." From Roosevelt's perspective, the people of New Mexico have proved their worthiness for statehood through their military valor on the battlefield. So President Roosevelt boosted New Mexico's chances of becoming a state with passage of the Reclamation Act in 1908. The Reclamation Act provided federal funding for the Rio Grande project. The purpose of this project was to provide a reliable and efficient source of irrigation for southern New Mexico and the El Paso border region. New Mexico Governor Miguel Antonio Otero, who served as the 16th governor of the Territory of New Mexico, worked closely with Roosevelt to achieve these objectives. Otero organized a statehood convention in Albuquerque that generated a political momentum for statehood. And this was finally achieved in 1910 when President William Taft visited New Mexico and spoke in favor of admitting it as a state. So one of the key issues for Roosevelt and for many politicians during this time period was increasing the size of the population. This was an interest that was held by the New Mexico Bureau of Immigration and many territorial officials. In 1900, the U.S. Census reported that the population of New Mexico was at about 195,000 individuals. And by 1910, it increased to by 60% to reach 327,000 people. And apparently, this is what pushed New Mexico over the finish line. This and efforts really to expand irrigation in the southern part of the state. So by 1910, President Taft endorsed the Enabling Act. And this was a law that authorized both territories to form a constitution and a state government to be admitted to the Union. Okay. So I've looked at a number of historical sources that really point to the central importance of the Mesilla Valley in New Mexico's long and winding journey from a territory in 1850 to becoming a state in 1912. Beginning with the efforts of Rafael Ruelas and Father Ramon Ortiz to settle Mesilla after the Mexican-American War, this area became an important destination for families. And following the Gadsden Purchase in 1854, the Southwest borderlands attracted the attention of miners, land speculators, and investors who saw great potential in the region's rich mineral resources. While Sylvester Mowry and Rafael Ruelas held conventions in Tucson and Mesilla in the 1850s to organize the Territory of Arizona, their grand proposals significantly enlarged the size of Doñana County. And after the Gadsden Purchase, the Southwest borderlands, weekly newspapers published during the beginning of the Civil War illustrated how Mesilla became entangled in a bloody conflict over control of the western states and territories. And it was in this context that Secretary William F.M. Arny's proposal to establish the Territory of Montezuma in 1865 envisioned the Mesilla Valley as becoming an economically productive part of the Union. This is an image of a mine that many of you may have encountered in the present day up in the Oregon Mountains. If any of you have parked at the La Cueva parking lot in our current Oregon Mountains and Desert Peaks National Monument. The Modoc mine was a silver mine that had been extremely productive. And really this was one of the main anchors or lures that had brought people into this region in the 1880s. And we can assume that maybe some of these miners who traveled great distances to try and strike it rich in the mines were not literate and they had not read the Bureau of Immigration's many publications and pamphlets. But nonetheless, we can understand the context in which economic development really became central to this region's identity as a result of that activity. And then lastly, while people recognized the central importance of irrigation long before passage of the Reclamation Act, the federal law boosted support for New Mexico statehood in 1912. Plans to build Elephant Butte Dam and Reservoir, which was completed in 1916, were essential for realizing New Mexico's great potential for agriculture. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has some.
We often give our guest speakers a little gift token gift. Here's a token for the rat now. But Daniel works for the state. They're not allowed to take gifts. So I guess that cup of coffee was it was good coffee. I want to thank the audience so much. Is there anything anybody wants to say, or you have questions? Are you ready for that? Okay.
Well, I just have a question. Is this going to be online so everybody can see it?
Yes, so Alexandra is recording the presentation with her camcorder, and we're going to post it along with the other Taylor Talks on the YouTube channel for New Mexico Historic Sites.
Oh, thank you.
Question over here.
I'm curious how they finally decided where to put the border between Arizona and New Mexico, because it looks very different, obviously, than what you showed us.
Okay, that's a very good question, and I may have skipped over that. In the middle of the Civil War, there was this squabbling over control of this territory, and first it was claimed by the Confederacy, And then Abraham Lincoln stepped in and passed a law with the assistance of Congress called the Organic Act of Arizona. And that was in 1863 that established a separation between the Territory of New Mexico and the Territory of Arizona. And this really was an attempt to kind of block the type of activity that we saw with the occupation of Mesilla in 1861. That was another one of these actions taken by the federal government that really was sort of drawing a line in the sand. There wasn't necessarily a rational or even a geographical reason why the border was established in a particular location. I think you would have to dig pretty far into the notes of the surveyors who conducted that drawing of the line to really understand what the overall motive was. But for whatever reason, during that time period, New Mexico and Arizona were just treated as the same block. And I'm sure people from Arizona are equally offended when they say someone claims it from New Mexico as vice versa. But they really did emerge as very distinct locations, not only in terms of the geography and differences between the Chihuahuan Desert and the Sonora Desert, but also between the different cultures in the Upper Rio Grande Valley and in the Gila Valley. So I hope that answers part of your question. All right. Yes?
Is there anything left of Fort Fillmore? I know where Fort Fillmore Road is, but is there anything left of Fort?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's actually one of my favorite activities is to drive it around in a circle trying to find exactly where Fort Fillmore is. There is a Fort Fillmore Road off of South Main Street, but it sort of dead ends around a pecan orchard. And my understanding is that there is a cemetery for Fort Fillmore, but a lot of the adobe ruins have been lost to time. The land that the cemetery on, I believe, is owned by the Salopek family, who also owns a lot of the pecan orchards. Yes.
Are there any remaining remnants of where the actual Battle of Mesilla took place and the encampment where the Confederates camped in the area?
No, I haven't seen any attempts to sort of recreate that Battle of Mesilla. I think it would require a lot of sleuthing, mostly because the channel of the river has significantly changed course since the 1860s. I think that the Confederacy probably did enter from the southwest corner of the Mesilla Plaza because what's currently the Fritz store, the Fritzy house over there, was also used by the Mexican soldiers when they had occupied this region during a flare-up about the boundary dispute in the 1850s. And that seemed to be sort of a strategic location around the Mesilla Plaza. All right. Any other queries or comments? All right. Well, if not, I'd like to thank you all for coming to today's Taylor Talk. It was a real pleasure sharing some of my research with you, and I look forward to seeing you all at the Taylor-Mesilla Historic Site during our grand opening. So thank you very much.